Mark Johnson, the voice of the Buffaloes. I thought, Mark, first, before we bring you in here, I was listening to Sirius XM last weekend, and obviously when the Buffs were playing North Dakota State, and I heard you and your partner on Sirius XM, and I thought to myself, I need to text Mark and see if he can get on the show next week before you guys come to Lincoln. So, Mark, officially welcome to the show, and thanks for doing this.
Well, it's good to be on. There was you might not have heard. I had a pretty serious accident in the rodeo arena about 5 weeks ago. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do that game, and so it was nice to be there. I was pretty uncomfortable, but we got through the ball game. I'm feeling better this week and can't wait to get to Lincoln.
Okay, so let's go back to the conversation we had last year, because I kind of want to go through this in the calendar year with you before we really dive deep into Saturday's matchup. I remember when we talked to you last year, you said there has never been a buzz like this around Boulder, obviously. Yeah. And we go through the timeline of Colorado starting 3-0, and then obviously the 4-8 season happens. But just walk us through the last, I don't know, what has it been, a year and a half or so? Yep. I believe he got hired in December, so a little over a year and a half of Coach Prime at the helm for Colorado. Not only what it's been for the university, but also the surrounding area in and around Boulder.
Well, it really has never slowed down. And, you mentioned that 3-0 start, and it just got it got stupid here in Boulder, to be honest with you. I mean, the first 3 weeks we had, let's see, Fox Big News pregame show twice. And I think ESPN had their pregame show here 2 or 3 weeks. Time Magazine was here. 60 Minutes was here. A bunch of ESPN shows were here from ESPN television. It was the epicenter of college football, and obviously after the 3-0 start, when they dropped a couple of ball games, some of that top edge dropped off. But the Prime effect has not. It has been there. We've sold out season tickets for the second year in a row. Giving and those kind of things continues to be through the roof. It's just a different animal. And I kind of thought, well, maybe after year one, it may tail off a little bit, but it certainly has not with Buff Nation. I mean, the fans are still where they were a year ago. The expectations are through the roof. And, we're kind of riding this wave right now.
So I guess from a program or even an athlete standpoint, how have you seen them handle that, right? Obviously, there's so much conversation about Shedeur and Travis and the rest of those guys, and we'll get to them in just a moment. But from an overall standpoint, because it's not easy to go from one day being Colorado, which, and no disrespect, nowhere talked about to the amount that they are nowadays, to then being the biggest story in college sports, whether they're winning or losing.
Well, the thing about it is, and you talk to all the kids that are here right now, the athletes, they for the most part have all come on board. There's a few, the Charlie Offerdals and Cam Dempsey's. There's a few guys, Trevor Woods, who have stayed around, but for the most part, they're all brand new. So all they know is the Prime effect. That's all they've been around. I was right before the season began, I was talking with Shedeur, and I asked about it. I said, how do you handle this? Because every time I turn around, there you are. I mean, the Sanders are everywhere. They're selling, what is it, California almonds, and they're selling whatever chicken company they're with. I forget. I'm not even sure all the endorsements they have. I said, and he said, well, that's all I've ever known. And so I think the same is true with the rest of the roster that's been brought in from the transfer portal. That's what these guys know. It's just been this way for them. And so, for those of us who have been around, there's been an enormous change. For those of us who have come on board when Prime got here, it's just what Prime does. And, I think I probably said with you last year, when he gets up in the morning and makes scrambled eggs, it becomes front page news. Everything he does is like that. And, the interesting thing about it, you've got Colorado fans, you've got Prime fans. They're very different. There have been a group of people that have come on board, and we welcome them. Come on, become a Buff fan. But they're here because of Prime, and through the process of watching Prime coach the Buffaloes, they become Buffs fans. And so it's been interesting to see that process, this adoption, if you will, that's taken place with these Prime fans who have now become Colorado fans. I got an email just yesterday morning from a woman in Alaska, and she says, I have loved watching you and listening to you on television and radio the last couple of years. I know you've got Prime show coming up on Thursday. Here's a couple of questions I hope you'll consider asking them. And so you get stuff like that all the time. And she said in her email, she said, I knew nothing about the Colorado Buffaloes, but when Prime got hired, I became a fan. And so there's been this enormous explosion of Buff fans who many were Prime fans and now become Colorado fans. And so it's really kind of a fascinating process.
We're speaking with the voice of Colorado football, Mark Johnson, with us. And Mark, I guess let's stick on Dion and Coach Prime for a moment. I think there's a lot of misconstrued information and also just like the lack of knowledge about maybe how he operates, because believe it or not, in this day of social media, everything gets blown out of proportion. All the negative things are the ones that go viral, right? And we laugh about it because it's so true. I was listening to Coach Prime's press conference earlier this week, and obviously as he's talking about Nebraska and he's breaking down the North Dakota State game. And I know he does this just from listening to his other press conferences because they do surface. And obviously we kind of keep tabs on everything here in Nebraska. But it's so much about, man, if Jimmy Horn, if I would have known that he was 2 yards away from 200 yards, I would have gotten him another reception. This is what Shadur did. This is what Travis Hunter did. He's very vocal about the positives with his athletes that I'm sure, number one, that speaks to those guys. But number two, that's sometimes the stuff that doesn't make it to social media or doesn't make it to front page news, like you said.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about it. He's very cognizant of, how should I put this? Promoting his players. He talks about their brand becoming bigger because, as we well know with Prime, social media is enormous within his world. If you notice on their practice jerseys, for example, they've got their Instagram or X handles on their jerseys, and so he's very cognizant of that, about wanting to promote them, helping them build their brand, build their name, obviously improve their game. He talks a lot about what kind of men they're going to become. And so that's a great focus by him that doesn't get talked about, I think, nearly enough. So there is that aspect of it that I think is a little bit hidden because, the other stuff that pops up, the stuff that he'll talk about in terms, his back and forth he had with the Denver Post writer, or his back and forth he had with CBS, or whatever else it is, that gets picked up and that becomes viral. And so the stuff that he does trying to help and promote and empower, if you will, the student athlete kind of gets lost, I think, a lot of times in the shuffle.
Okay, so now let's discuss that other stuff, right? Because as two guys that do cover football programs or cover college athletic programs, we understand that just because it's made a big deal outside of the program or outside of the state, it's not really a big issue. It's not really something that really matters a whole lot. So when it is the stuff with the Denver Post and a couple of other things that have obviously surfaced, are those problems that the nation and the surrounding areas are making a much bigger deal than they actually are, or are they actually a pretty big issue?
Well, I think it depends on what you look at, and a lot of times it you see the blip, and then it disappears here locally, and you know this. I mean, you're younger than I am. You're more involved in social media than I am. Stuff gets picked up, and all of a sudden, it's like a grass fire, right? I mean, it just takes off and sweeps across the nation. And Prime is he's a polarizing guy, for legitimate reasons or not. He picks up on something, and the nation gets wind of it, and there are those that will run with it and defend him. There are those that will run with it and criticize him. It's part of being, I think, a really national, or for him, an international public figure. That's what's going to happen. We see it with actors, you see it with politicians, you see it with singers and athletes when they do something, and that's the way his career has been. I mean, he and I are exactly the same age. Our birthdays are just a few days apart. And I remember, in 1989 when he's with Florida, he's this bombastic neon Dion primetime cornerback that comes out. He's high stepping and doing all the things he does. He's got the dance at the end zone, and he became very polarizing back then. And so that's what the public sees. And he's talked exhaustively about that. You can go back and find some of the interviews where he talked about he knew what he was doing. He was creating this persona, this image. And that's very different than, for example, like tomorrow when he and I get together to do the show. He'll walk in, sit down, we have a nice conversation. The lights are on, the cameras are on, the microphones are on. They say 3, 2, 1, you go. He's fantastic because there's nobody better in a microphone or a camera than he is. We do our half hour together. We get done. We go to a commercial break, and he gives me a little fist bump and says, "I'll see you on Saturday," and he's fantastic to deal with. And so there's these. It's interesting with him because you see these different sides of him. The public doesn't see what obviously his team sees. They don't see what his staff sees. They don't see what guys like me that are in on the inside and working with him, that what we see. They just see the Coach Prime aspect of it,
Of course.
and I don't think it's fair to judge him simply on that.
Once again, we're joined by the voice of the Buffs, Mark Johnson. All right, let's talk on the football field now. Last week, Colorado wins against North Dakota State. I kind of want to give you a blank canvas and just run with it. From your vantage point, a game that was neck and neck for the most part, and then obviously a lot was made out of the decision to throw on first down with a minute and change remaining. From your vantage point, just kind of walk us through that. What did you see last week at Folsom?
Well, first off, listen, North Dakota is my home country. That's where I grew up. I know what that program is all about. And I was saying leading up to that ball game, if you beat North Dakota State by 1 point, you say praise God and you move on to the next game, right? That is
Absolutely.
a quality football program. They're now, 6-2, I think, against Power 4 teams in their last 8 games. And they've had some enormous wins during that. They won, 17 national championship. That's a great football team. That's not a good football team. That FCS team will beat a lot of FBS teams, right?
Also a
And
program. It's a
oh,
program because it's spanned through coaches.
yes, I've been saying if for people that don't know about them, they're akin to Boise, right? They're like Boise State. It doesn't matter who coaches them. It's a program. It's a system. It's a culture. It
Yep.
is what it is. So I knew that was going to be an exceptionally tough game, and so I wasn't shocked by it in any way, shape, or form. Now, in terms of evaluating Colorado, what do we see? Well, we know the 2 and 12 are elite players and freaks of nature, especially Travis Hunter. I mean, these are transcendent guys. There's a reason why they expect to be both of them probably in the top 5 picks in the NFL draft coming up next spring. Jimmy Horn Jr. is a difference maker. I think we saw with Colorado after that disastrous year from an offensive line standpoint, 56 sacks, 52 on Shedeur a year ago. I think we saw improvement. Was it where we thought we would see it? Well, it's a one-game sample. I'm not going to base an opinion on that, but I think we saw improvement, maybe not where I wanted to see. Now we'll see what happens against the big boy football team this weekend in Nebraska. The defensive front was better in many respects. Was it where I hoped that I wanted to see them dominate? Did they do that? No, but there was improvement being made there. I think what Robert Livingston did on the defensive side is he evolved through his first game as a coordinator. I thought his second half was better than his first half. When they needed to, with about a buck 40, 50, something like that left in the third quarter, they had an 8-minute drive that made an 11-point game. That was awful impressive. And so there's reasons to feel really good about what Colorado did. I'm not going to base an entire opinion on one game because it was a quality opponent. I'm just going to say I saw improvement. I think Colorado's better, and now I want to buy more stock. I want to see what they do this weekend in Lincoln.
What is the viewpoint on Nebraska heading into this Saturday? Because we heard, obviously, Coach Prime talking about Dylan Raiola. And as you can probably assume, Dylan Raiola is a lot of the talk here in Lincoln, right? Because it feels like for the first time in, frankly, what has been probably a decade, Nebraska has a guy that can throw the ball, can deliver the mail. And as somebody that sees Shedeur pretty frequently, you understand how important that is and how important it is nowadays as a college program to correctly identify a quarterback, whether that's Coach Prime or Nebraska. Because on the flip side, we're seeing what happens with Florida State. We're seeing what's happening with Clemson, a couple of those other programs where if you misidentify a quarterback, it's a tragedy waiting to happen, really. So what is the viewpoint from Buffs fans from Colorado on the Huskers ahead of Saturday?
Well, I'll tell you this, and being that our game was Thursday night, and as injured as I am, I sat down on the recliner on Saturday and watched that game against UTEP, and was really wanting to see what Raiola was all about because of all the hype leading up. I thought I saw, and keep in mind, it's UTEP, and we know they've had a horrible stretch of football here, and so I don't want to overstate what the opposition was, but what I saw. I thought from Nebraska's standpoint, number one was a complete football team. I thought they looked the way a team is supposed to look. I thought they looked big and strong up top. or up front rather. I think they protected Raiola when he needed to make plays. You guys you're very aware that where drops the arm angle and does the Mahomes esque sidearm over the middle on the crossing pattern, and so he looked like he belongs there. And, he's a freshman. He may make a mistake or two as the year goes on, but he looks like you're supposed to look. And I think that Nebraska's got a guy that's going to be a very good to great quarterback, maybe being transcendent when it's all said and done. And then defensively, I thought I saw a very solid football team as well. And so that's why I want to see this game, because I saw things from Colorado on our side that say, okay, this is an improved football team, but let's see what they look like second week in a row. And then I watched Nebraska and said, well, they look like a much more complete football team than I saw a year ago at Folsom Field. But think about who they were playing. Now let's see what they look like against Colorado. So I look at this game on Saturday. It's what is it, 6:30 Central Time, and I think to myself, this is really a game that's going to tell us an awful lot about two programs in their second year under their head coaches. We think they're better. They look like they're better. We saw things in week one that make us believe they're better. Now we're really going to find something out on Saturday at Memorial Stadium.
I would ask you this. Once again, we're joined by the voice of the Buffs, Mark Johnson. So much is made about the off the field stuff with Colorado, more so than Nebraska, obviously. Mm-hmm. Colorado has this sense of swagger with them, right? They just do. They carry this swagger, this really, really cool view from the outsider looking in. Sometimes that can translate to undisciplined football on the field. Is that a concern for Buffs fans, or for like the lack of discipline on the field? Because at times we can see emotion take over when we're talking about 18 to 24-year-old athletes.
Yeah, I think it could be a concern, but here's the thing. Last year, did we see that on a regular basis? I would say no. We saw it. There were times, where they hurt themselves. Where my partner Gary Barnett would call selfish penalties, right? Where they do things where they lose their cool. Prime got on them. That's one of the things that gets lost with Prime as well. You think back to his playing days. He was a flamboyant guy, make no mistake about it. But he was also a disciplined football player. And you talk to guys that played with him, with the Falcons or wherever, they talked about a guy that was very disciplined in terms of how he approached the game. And so he does preach that to this team. The Buffs only had 3 penalties last week against North Dakota State. And so could it be a concern? Yeah, I guess it could be. But we haven't seen where that's a problem. It's popped up like a lot of football programs will have. Last year we saw it through the course of the 12 games. But game number 1 this season, I thought it was a very disciplined football team out there, not making a lot of mistakes. So could it be a problem? Yes. Has it been a problem? No.
A couple more before we let you go, Mark. We have to talk 2 and 12. We have to talk about them here. I say Shedeur Sanders. What word or phrase comes to your mind, and why?
Well, I would say the first thing that comes to mind is professional. That's the way he approaches it. I see him as an NFL quarterback, the way he conducts himself, the way he reads defenses. I always tell the story last year when he first got here, and I didn't know him from Adam, obviously. I mean, I knew about him at Jackson, but didn't know anything about him. He and I were going to do a pregame interview together, and as I was just about to sit down with him, the offensive coordinator at the time walked up and said something to him. And so for about 5-6 minutes, they stood there and had a conversation. And I just got a chance to eavesdrop. And so I was really interested. How does this guy handle himself? They were talking about the game plan. Ironically, I think it was, or coincidentally, I should say, I think it was before the Nebraska game last year. And so Shedeur began to talk about, well, I saw this, and when I break down, and was talking like a coach. And I was really impressed with how he handled himself. It was a high-level football conversation with the OC at that point in time. And then you watch him, the way he makes reads, what he sees out there, the way he's able to buy time. I see a guy that looks like a professional quarterback, and I fully understand why people consider him a top 10 NFL draft pick in the first round next year. And so I think when you say Shedeur Sanders, I go, well, he's a professional already.
All right, now last one before we let you go. Mark Johnson, voice of the Buffs, joining us. Travis Hunter, so much is made week in and week out about the snap count, right? Because I think I read last week 125 or over 125, I believe, snaps on both sides of the field included. Number one, what makes him so dynamic to be able to do that? But also number two, is it sustainable? That's what I would ask you.
Well, people have been asking that. I think it was 129 snaps totally, sat out 2, and it was out there for, I think, 4 or 5 more special teams. Somebody told me it's 134 total snaps he took, but 120 offense and defense. Is it sustainable? If you would ask me that question last year at this time, I'd say absolutely not. But then I watched him do it last year. He played more snaps last year than any player in the history of Colorado football in a single season and missed 3.5 games because of injury. Now, you do wonder about the long-term effect of that. Now, he's a freak. I mean, I say all the time, I'm not sure what planet he's from. It's just not this one, all right? He's different. I've seen great athletes over the long career in which I've called games. Laviska Shenault, who obviously Huskers fans remember from game-winning touchdown, was a freak athlete. but he isn't what Travis is. Travis is so different and so unique. And then there's an endurance about him. I saw an article Sports Illustrated did here right before the season where he worked with one of these trainers during the offseason. And the guy says, we really need to do a biopsy on him to figure out what he is, because I've never worked with a guy like that. So he's a freakish talent. He really is. He's an interesting guy. He's very unique. If you follow him on social media, and I'm old guy, I'm get off my lawn guy, right? So I don't understand it. Him in a onesie jumping around his room, and
I saw that.
yeah, right. It's not my generation, so I don't understand it. But the fans seem to love it, right? The younger fans especially. And then he's really kind of a homebody. He's not a go out guy. He's not a go out and party guy. He's got a fiance. They've got a home together just outside of Boulder that he purchased a while back. That's all he does. So his entire life is playing football, preparing for football, studying football, going to class. You know, as you well know, you probably heard he was a 4.0 academic All-American a year ago on top of it. And he goes home to his fiance. And so he's really a unique guy. And he acts like he's 35 instead of, 20 or whatever he is at this point in time. And so he really, I said on the broadcast last Thursday, he made that freakish catch, front right corner of the end zone. North Dakota State player holding an arm around his neck, got one finger on it somehow, hauls it in for a touchdown. I said, Buff Nation, you better enjoy this, because he's over after this year. He's going to the National Football League. He'll be a top 5 or 6 pick, and you're not going to see another one like this maybe ever. And so enjoy this, because it's something that I've never seen before, and I'm just kind of having fun watching it week in and week out.
I think there's something to be said, not even just Buff Nation. I think you could say the entire country, right, of college football fans, just the casual ones that have no skin in the game when you're talking about Colorado or whoever they're playing that week. Enjoy it while it lasts, because at the college level, it's something really, really spectacular. Obviously it is, and it's noted once they move on to the NFL, but specifically at the college level, it's really, really fun to watch. Okay, I thought of one just as we were discussing right there, so I apologize. Sure. Outside of the names, right? Shadur, Travis, Shiloh, Jimmy Horn, who is somebody that Husker fans need to know about, whether it's on the line, whether it's at the running back position, whoever it may be, that on Saturday, if they're going to the game, watching on television, they can know a little bit more about them? Keep an eye on number 7, a running back, a transfer from Ohio State, Dallin Hayden. I think he's a guy that, as the year goes on, is going to become more of a part of this offense. I think another guy, Will Shepard, they brought in. He was a transfer guy. He's a very athletic wide receiver. On the defensive side, on that defensive front, Chidozie Wonko. Keep an eye on him. He's a big fella in the middle there. And B.J. Green, who we know from our days in the Pac-12, he was at Arizona State, was an all-conference guy, has come in. I think those are a couple of guys to really – DJ McKinney in the secondary might be another one. He plays opposite Travis at cornerback, and I think he's really another transfer that can really have an impact. And so there's just a few names. And then maybe Jalen Wester. I'm just sitting here thinking off the top of my head, a wide receiver, number 10. That'll be another guy to keep an eye on. So there's just about 5 or 6 names that I think are – difference maker kind of players, impactful guys on both sides of the ball that can, at different times, maybe alter the course of a game, starting on Saturday with Nebraska. Well, Mark, you guys are back in the Big 12. Nebraska, obviously not in the Big 12, but you're going to still get to travel to Lincoln. You've been to Lincoln before, haven't you? Oh, yeah. It's my 21st year sometimes, yeah. Yeah, so hopefully you get treated well while you're here. Hopefully the Husker fans treat you guys, the Buffs fans, the Buffs players, everybody well while they are here. I'm sure you heard the little quote from Matt Rule, who I think was really trying hard not to give bulletin board material, because that's such a big thing now, similar to what we just talked about, 15 minutes ago or so. He was like, be Nebraska nice on Sunday. We'll call it good from there. But hopefully you guys have a great, safe trip out here to Lincoln, and I'm looking forward to the game. And who knows, Mark, maybe I'll see you in the press box on Saturday night. Well, I'll tell you this. Number 1, come up and say hi. And number 2, I've always loved our trips to Lincoln, man. The fans have always been great to me. I think it's one of the great locations in college football. So I'm really looking forward to this one, and it's always good to be on with you.